This is Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. On the show, you'll hear from innovators in the food space. We'll have disruptive conversations with people from around the globe who are taking the lead on topics like food sustainability, ending world hunger, food security, and so much more. I'm your host, Paul Newnham. Today, we're chatting with Kelly McJannett. Kelly is the CEO of Food Ladder, an award-winning non-profit addressing food security in remote and Indigenous communities, as well as education, health, and economic participation, with a holistic focus on well-being. In this episode, Kelly and I engage in a wide-ranging conversation on the interconnectedness of food systems, sustainable agriculture, and community development. This is all live from South by Southwest Sydney, where we sat down with a live studio audience. Let's jump in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Future Fork live podcast recording. My name is Paul Newnham. I'm the CEO of the SDG 2 Advocacy Hub, so Sustainability Development Goal 2 Advocacy Hub, and the host of the Future Fork podcast. And today I'm joined by Kelly McJannett, the founding CEO of Food Ladder, to talk all things interconnectedness. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Hi, Paul. So good to be here.
So, Kelly, we're here at South by Southwest Sydney, and I'm honoured to have you joining me to discuss the importance of interconnectedness in the food space. To give a very brief overview regarding yourself, you were the 2016 winner of Australia's 100 Most Influential Women in Social Enterprise and the Not-for-Profit category. You come with a wealth of knowledge, experience, and stories. So let me start, though, with your current role. You're the founding CEO of Food Ladder. Food Ladder is going to be mentioned a lot today. So for anyone who doesn't know, let's start with, what is Food Ladder?
Food Ladder is a not-for-profit organisation that is addressing food security, and we're doing that in basically through education. So we implement AI-enabled hydroponic greenhouses into schools. Ultimately, we're responding to the fact that food is the nexus of the world's health, economic, social, climate issues, and we're trying to reverse that by putting the capability of food growing technology into the hands of the communities that need that to basically convert the longest supply chains in the world to the shortest overnight.
So given some of what you're just sharing, let's talk a little bit about interconnectedness. What does interconnectedness mean to you?
To me, it's really about looking at a challenge, these kind of wicked problems that we are all faced with as human beings on the planet, and appreciating the symbiotic relationship they have with one another and the fact that this is a holistic kind of challenge. Essentially, at Food Ladder, we appreciate that while we are concerned with food security, I suppose, as a primary outcome of what we do, it underpins so much more in society. So in Australia specifically, in the communities that we work in, there are a huge number of social challenges that look and sound very different to food security, right? So truancy, for example, in Indigenous communities, school attendance, a lack of engagement in school, a lack of participation in the workforce, challenges in remote and low socioeconomic communities with jobs that people find engaging is another one. New pathways into employment. These don't have anything to do with food security, right? Wrong. Food Ladder is proving that by implementing a solution that is extremely adaptable, very, very scalable, very simple to use, and essentially addresses food, we're able to address a multitude of these other social outcomes. So essentially what we're proving is that, food is the core, the seed, if you like, of these other social determinants of health. And that is what interconnectedness is really all about, creating a solution that is holistic, that is owned, if you like, emotionally by so many in the community, that benefits that are reaped from it are so much broader than just how many lettuces did we grow this year, etc. Having this kind of visceral, emotional connection to the program is really about the interconnectedness, I think, and that's what we're trying to do.
You mentioned some of the social determinants of health. What are some of the challenges there?
Let's talk in a really kind of granular perspective to begin with. You know, we speak to teachers in classrooms all the time that will say, oh, you know, we were trying to get to the root of the issue with Ben. He just couldn't focus in class. You know, he kind of comes off as a angry kind of kid. You know, these teachers are incredible. Teachers are incredible people. Shout out to teachers doing really hard work in very difficult environments with not enough money a lot of the time. And so often these teachers are working really, really hard with individual children who have what appear to be behavioural issues. And, you know, we hear these stories like this one about Ben, for example, that comes off as bad behaviour, anger, and actually it's pain, physical pain that's being experienced by that child from tooth decay from bad diets. And again, it's a food security issue. The stats are there. As we know, 94% of children do not eat enough fruit and vegetables. It's a disaster. And as we were talking about this morning and last night, Paul, like the issue is not an availability of food. There is enough food for these children. And it's really a question of access in these particular communities. So these challenges that are being felt by children, whether it's pain from tooth decay, whether it's a lack of ability to focus because they don't have enough good fats in their diet, they're then not able to learn and absorb information. We're talking about whole of life damage and trauma, aside from just the straight up lack of nutritional benefit that they're not getting from the food that they're not eating. It's all the emotional and developmental challenges that happen when young people don't feel proud of themselves because they're not able to participate in a meaningful way and engage in their own education. They're not able to tap into what makes them extraordinary. They're not able to feel pride. You know, it's really funny at Food Ladder, we hear every day these incredible outcomes from our teachers, and we're just blown away because we find that we're able to, and it comes back to interconnectedness, address things that we never set out to actually achieve. And one is, bizarrely, a sense of pride. So when kids grow something, it's the process of planting the seed, nurturing the plant. Food ladders are 5 times more productive than traditional farming. It's a very quick reward feed. It's like a dopamine hit. So they're able to go back every day. You know, teachers tell us over and over again, Food Ladder brings kids to school. There are kids that come to school that never came before Food Ladder was there. It's why they come to school. They're proud of that plant. They're nurturing that plant. They then get to harvest that plant and they're taking that back to mum and dad. And they are actually educating their parents and championing healthy eating. So that feeling of pride is tattooed on that child's psyche for life. And that ultimately is the cornerstone of addressing a trend in changing attitudes amongst young people towards healthy eating. And ultimately that means that beyond our involvement with each child in the program as they grow, that tattoo, that emotional sense of pride that maybe they never had before changes the decisions that they make about how they're going to eat in the future. And that's how we make a difference to health globally.
So when we're talking about these connections, you've talked about people's physical health, so disease, these kinds of things, mental health. What are some of the other connections that you're making through the work that you do?
There are things that we're doing, again, now that we didn't really ever anticipate that we would do. One of the big ones, I think, is connecting into tech. I think there's an incredible opportunity at the moment. We all know the issues that are out there, right? There's plenty of major challenges. There's a lot of big stuff going on at the moment that's really overwhelming. I think with Food Ladder, it's very simple and it's very applicable, it's very scalable, and it's very positive. So what we've been really enjoying at Food Ladder recently is developing beautiful connections with corporates and government groups as well that are really seriously, genuinely committed to using what they're great at in the world to make social change. And I think, obviously, money makes the world go round. We need money to do things big and at scale. But there's also plenty of incredible bits of tech and skills that have been developed that are really adding a huge amount of value to our program. And at Food Ladder, we've always believed in the power of partnerships. And you can't boil the ocean, but we're doing a lot of incredible work in partnership with other great organisations, both for-profit and not-for-profit, to kind of really broaden the mushroom effect, if you will, of, pardon the pun, that Food Ladder is creating at the moment. So that's really exciting.
Let me ask the why now. So why are you passionate about feeding the most disadvantaged communities around the globe? Where did that come from?
For me personally, it came from seeing it up close and personal and feeling it and experiencing it myself. Alex, my co-founder, and I both came together with our own experiences that made us want to address this issue. Personally, I was working in remote communities in education, and it was amazing as someone who prioritizes wanting to eat really well, just being very confronted by the fact that it was impossible where I was living at the time up in Nhulunbuy, right? So I was going into the shops, wanting to buy some fruit and veg. The price of stuff was completely, just absolutely extortionate, and the quality is just revolting. So, if there's one cauliflower on the shelf for $16, and I'm not exaggerating, doesn't matter if you're a billionaire, you're not going to buy the cauliflower because it's not worth eating. And essentially, this is the problem that we saw up close and personal as an organisation and went, no, we can do this differently. We happen to know a lot about how, ironically, flowers are grown in hydroponic technology. We know a lot, obviously, about the situation, the climate in Australia, and we thought, what if we were to shrink this and put it straight in the hands of the community that needs it, that are crying out for it? Because obviously it makes no sense to be in Nhulunbuy and far East Arnhem Land and to be buying a cauliflower that's been grown in South Australia. Aside from the price and the quality of the cauliflower, the extreme impact that that's had on the environment, getting the cauliflower up into that community, is really appalling. So that was, I suppose, essentially the beginning of the idea. And then from there, we had to try a multitude of kind of different angles until we arrived at what we are today. But it's been very interesting. Only yesterday, again, the issue is in the AFR, in the press. And for those who aren't aware, last year, Woolies posted a 26% profit, and we have a duopoly that control the market here in Australia. And these two organisations make 25% more than the banks, I believe it is, the Australian Big Four, and our banks are the most profitable in the world. So it just doesn't check that we have this crisis, food security crisis, and all the down-the-line challenges that come into the Indigenous communities as a result of that. We have this issue on one side, profitability and retail, food retail, and then on the other side, Australia has the horrendous record of having the highest rates of type 2 diabetes anywhere in the world, and that is among the Indigenous population children. Type 2 diabetes is preventable with diet. It's, these kind of simple insights, I suppose, and the interconnectedness, again, of how they fit together. I'm not suggesting that this has been easy every step of the way, but just really clearly understanding that challenge and wanting to get right to the heart of it. And I suppose unlocking that pride and that joy in that child has been a real kind of light bulb moment and is really catalysing our growth moving forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love how you're really looking at this from a systemic perspective and looking at the system. So let's get a little bit practical. Food Ladder, we've talked a little around it, but tell us a little bit about how you're actually working in these communities.
Our strategy is all about engagement with schools. So one of our mantras inside our team, again, to come back, there's kind of outcomes and outputs, if you like, of the business. And we realised pretty early on that we needed to have an institution if we were going to scale. And so that became the schooling system. So then we had to kind of pivot and say, well, we need to make life easier for teachers. What if actually our job was to now that we've got the tech all sorted, the agritech, make life easier for teachers. And so then we set about basically creating hundreds and thousands of teaching resources that would link any class that you wanted to teach your students on any given day to the food ladder. You want to teach Year 6 art, sure, here's the whole lesson plan with the links to the curriculum codes and so forth. Because what we were realising was that kids are engaging much better when they've got their hands dirty. They want to be outside, especially kids, in communities like the ones that we work in. And so we just went about doing that, training teachers in how to use the system because they're very simple and connecting the dots there. And that very quickly, of course, we were able to see that we were actually outsourcing the operations of the agritech to the teachers, which is very simple. If they could achieve their lesson plan and their learning outcomes, then that was a win-win. So that was a really, really big insight. And then from then, we've really kind of doubled down on that. Our growth has very much been word of mouth. We're a big believer here in kind of crawling before you run, and we spent a number of years becoming kind of really solid. And at the moment, we're really moving into the very exciting rapid scale-up stage.
What role does tech and AI play in the work that you're doing?
It's funny, I kind of had a bit of a sense that we were going to be able to benefit from what was happening in AI, but quite frankly, I wasn't personally equipped or knowledgeable enough. So we put ourselves and our staff through a crash course with the University of Sydney Business School, and it was just extraordinary doing this exec ed course for my team and I, because we were kind of sitting there learning about the newer stuff that's coming out and so on, and quickly realised that we had application across every single level of our business. And to put it plainly, like to try and simply explain it, typically in the past and up to now, if you're a teacher wanting a food ladder, every single step has had to be managed by the individuals in the team. We've got almost 400 schools in the pipeline that want food ladders right now. So there's no issue with demand. The issue was, how are we as a very small not-for-profit going to raise the money to have all these deployment teams? And do we really want to be running all around the world, driving up carbon miles, putting these things in? No, we don't. So how do we get around all of that? And essentially, we've brought in automation at every single level. So from going from a world where a teacher would have to call us, speak to one of the team for an hour or so. Again, you're talking about teachers who are in class. So you've got to catch them when they're not teaching. It's hard. Then through to the ordering the system, working out the price, etc., right through to the freight, and then putting it up and how to plant it. That was all done in person. And when you're dealing with a country, which is a continent, it's a lot of travel and a lot of downtime. It's obviously not efficient. So to be at the stage that we're at in scale when all of these emerging technologies are coming to market is really, really exciting. And we're just extremely agile as an organisation, so we're able to adopt it all really, really quickly. Ultimately, what does that mean? It means that Food Ladder is the only network of connected greenhouses in the world. It means that in a very small amount of time, we believe that we will not have to actually physically go into any community at all, because all of this can be done by the community themselves. And I think most importantly, the connection is obviously with the schools in the network that they belong to. And I think it's funny if you think about supply chain, right? We talked about supply chain before, longest supply chains to shortest supply chains. And this idea of what's actually being disseminated, what's actually moving. And at Food Ladder, what we're doing is we're not moving the food, we're moving the information. And AI is allowing us to do that.
The ability for scale, I think, is huge. You were talking about globally. What's it looking like on the global scene for Food Ladder?
Yeah, it's very exciting. I think as a team, this has been a confronting challenge for us, because we know with climate change, this is an issue that's getting rapidly, rapidly worse. And we're trying to grapple with how we're going to solve for it. How can we really have an impact on this global issue that is getting worse fast? And up until embracing technology at the level that I don't know really how we're going to get around that, but this changes everything, because there are now, of course, no barriers. We're very excited about being able to share what we've learned here in Australia with the rest of the world and have a really, really big impact with people that need it yesterday. So that's our very exciting next step.
So in terms of how you're working with communities, how does Food Ladder measure its success Like, what's the success metrics? Because you're working on so many different levels here. So how are you thinking about that?
Yes, it's a good question. When we started out, we were like, what are we going to count? Do we count plants? Do we count kids? Do we count hours in the greenhouse? Do we count greenhouses? Do we count schools? And actually, we knew very quickly that we needed a longitudinal research partner. We needed someone who was going to go the distance, do all the benchmarking and so forth. And that became the Charles Perkins Centre. And they are the experts in the areas of health where we're having the biggest kind of impact. And they quickly said to us, no, you're counting all the wrong things. We can actually track and measure behavioural change. And this is what I was mentioning before. And they said, that's the really big one. And yeah, sure, count the lettuces and count the kilos because that's really, really important too. So we count it all. I mean, we've always been really data-driven and we count everything. We're able to see very, very instantaneously the kind of dashboard, if you will, of each school. And it's very important for us as well because we triangulate what's happening from a climate perspective and a climate data perspective. So when we're seeing temperatures go up, we're seeing how that's impacting food supply in various regions. And of course, the beautiful thing about climate control greenhouses is we're able to protect the food supply, the system for that community from external environmental impacts.
I was going to ask you a little bit about climate because obviously in a changing climate, the world is shifting very quickly and unpredictability is the enemy of good agriculture. It makes it very challenging, whereas a controlled environment creates some predictability.
Absolutely.
So how are you playing into that space and how are you seeing food ladders play a role there?
It's really cool. I think Australia, obviously, agriculture is one of our biggest industries. There's a really interesting thing with kids that are really not necessarily interested, I think, they've seen a lot of trauma. We all know about there's a lot of trauma. It's hard yakka being a farmer in Australia these days. But with tech, it changes things again. So I think it's revitalising farming households and communities, which is very, very exciting. I think the other thing which is really worth mentioning is, the food ladders become so much. They're not just growing food, they're laboratories for science, they're training facilities, and they're social enterprises. So something that's been kind of in the DNA of our organisation from the start is social enterprise development. And with controlled farming and protected cropping like this, we're able to train kids in small business. If you plant this many seeds, what's the harvest going to be? What's the projected harvest? What are the costs? What are the inputs? What are the outputs going to be from this particular harvest? How do we turn this crop into maybe a value-added product? And of course, it is worth mentioning, we don't own the food ladders, right? These all belong to the schools. So any profit or impact that is generated is the schools and it's their own. And all creativity and inventiveness that schools want to explore, we absolutely encourage and get right behind that. So, yeah, I think, that's, again, another kind of side effect of protected cropping that people are able to project and learn about small business and how to run an enterprise, which that's a hands-on thing. Again, you can read a textbook as much as you like, but ultimately it's not until you're literally counting the dollars at the end of the day that you understand, you really start to learn about profitability of a business, and it's important in these small communities.
So what would you say, you've obviously been doing this for a little while, what's some of the things that have most stood out to you or you've learned around food security and addressing it and getting nutritious food to people?
I think the thing that we didn't really realise at the outset was actually how poor the understanding of fresh food was in the communities that we're working with. We knew that there wasn't any, and we knew that people wanted it, but what we hadn't appreciated is that there wasn't actually the love there because there'd never been the connection in the first place. The kids that we work with have no idea how food is grown. They just think you go to the shop and you get food. A lot of the kids think this. It's staggering. So what it does for the mind and for the creativity, it does so much more than just kind of supplement their meal. And I think that's a point that we like to really bring home. This is so much more than a meal. It's so much more than that. It really is unlocking that whole kind of creative, that love of food. And there's a really important outcome as well that we never really set out to address, and that is the food waste piece. So if you appreciate food, you're less likely to waste it. And again, we see that a lot. We see that a lot. Nothing gets wasted out of the food ladder systems. It's going to the canteens, it's going home to families. We have plenty of schools that donate food to the local aged care facility. We have kids growing Indigenous bush foods that they turn into like native basil pesto we hear a lot about, bush tomato chutneys, teas, saltbush, rubs for meat, all sorts of incredible things. It's just wild. And it's kind of limitless what people want to do with it, what the schools and communities want to do with it. And as I said, we just celebrate all of that because it's the icing on the sugar-free cake.
What I love is what you've just described is really bringing back that connection to food. And I think when people have that connection to food, it creates a different starting point for the choices they make, the questions they ask. And doing that at school is helping start that journey young, which can hopefully have all kinds of future unintended consequences. I want to ask you, what excites you the most about food security and the future of it in Australia and also globally?
The impact that it will play in all the other issues. Getting it right, the impact that's going to have for the environment. Like, this just is staggering. I'm just really, really excited about what's possible through, fascinating, isn't it, when you think this conversation around AI that everyone's having and everyone's stressed out about AI taking away from jobs. Well, when it's applied to food ladder, it creates jobs because it means that we can create more social enterprises that can create industry in small communities. So we're just in this really important, exciting inflection point where we can kind of impact other food security is essentially going to impact other areas that are kind of under stress at the moment, like economy or the climate. So very, very excited to be a part of that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it brings us back to that starting point of food security and food being connected to culture, to who we are, to our starting point, to the foundation. And so it helps reconnect that right at the beginning. And then, as you're saying, AI becomes a tool for actually that connection. That's really interesting because so much of the conversation is about what AI could take away rather than what it potentially could reconnect, which is fascinating. One of the things I always like to ask on this podcast is also a little bit about food that you're enjoying. What's something that you've eaten recently that kind of keeps coming back to your mind and you're kind of going, ooh?
We had dinner last night to talk about this podcast, and I thought that Brussels sprout salad was very good. It was very good. And the calamari. I like the Brussels sprout salad. I mean, Brussels sprout, I think, is just what a hero. It's had such a great new life. I'm so stoked for the Brussels sprout.
Well, it used to be steamed to death.
Yes.
And I think as we've kind of discovered how to utilize it in different ways, it's brought back, real meaning.
We're treating it with respect.
Yeah.
Last night it was balsamic, it was charred, it was really exciting dish.
I like it. That was good. Well, thank you, Kelly, for joining me on the show.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to our live recording of Future Fork. If you haven't found the podcast, it's on Apple and Spotify and all other podcast channels, so you can check it out. We're going to have a bit of time for questions and conversation. If anyone wants to ask any questions to Kelly, we've got a mic around and we've got a couple of questions here.
Hi, my name's Uma. I head up marketing and media at SBS, and thanks so much for sharing your inspiring story. I think I'm really just curious about, how did it all start? Where did you get the idea from? How did it come to life?
Sitting there in Nullarbor, not being able to buy food for myself and seeing around me the drama that was playing out around that. I was working in the not-for-profit space in education at the time, and just this kind of like preoccupation with needing to address the issue, but also to have it kind of packaged in a social enterprise lens. And I spoke to a woman called Lisa George, who heads up the Macquarie Bank Foundation. And I said, who can I speak to that's doing social enterprise the best in Australia? And she gave me Alex's number, who's sitting to your right. And that was that. And Alex had created a social enterprise business working in cleaning and social cafe. And so we had the kind of social enterprise model, we had the insights around food security and education and health, and it was a matter of wrestling that into food ladder and then kind of trying things out. We tried a lot of things out, and we did a lot of work in India. We have a food ladder on mountaintops in Bhutan growing chilies. We've done a little bit in Uganda. But, we wanted to kind of get back here and wrestle the food security thing in Australia, then kind of getting into realising that the sweet spot, no, it's schools. And it's having something which is replicable, simple enough. This real balance between high production but simplicity of operations is really, really critical. And now with our kind of the tech advancements that we're making, we're really excited about going global. Thank you for the question.
Hi, thank you for that. My name is Lizette. So I work at a program that teaches tech in prison. And so my question for you is that you're so data-driven and relying on tech, but a lot of your processes or players are in areas that may not have the best connectivity or at all. And so how do you deal with that logistically and having the right information at the right time?
Yeah, it's a good question. Certainly in Australia, I think we're very fortunate with, again, it's a school thing because we're able to benefit from local Wi-Fi. Food ladders are, they're plug and play. So we're able to, again, benefit from existing electricity. Often we use solar as well. It just really, really helps that we can kind of plug into the resources that are there at the school. And we really see this as an extension of the school, an outdoor classroom, if you will. Again, with developing countries, again, the plan at the moment is to go through schools, but there will be other challenges. We call ourselves tech from an agritech perspective, tech agnostic. So if there's a better kind of dripper system, if there's NFT, whatever technology that comes to market, we want to see it and make sure that what we've got is always fit for purpose in the sense of being best to solve the issue, but also the price point has to be right because we need to keep the kind of capital investment in the infrastructure low so that it's not a barrier to entry. But, there's some amazing stuff right now coming out of Holland, these beautiful greenhouses that have solar panels on them that are also translucent. So we're really excited. We're looking at that at the moment. So again, it hasn't really been a challenge, I've got to say. Here in Australia, the biggest challenge has been the fact that huge amounts of the communities that we work in are cyclone areas. So they have to be cyclone rated to the highest level, which is just incredible. So within reason, if there's a cyclone in Far East Arnhem Land and you see a food ladder, you're safe in there. But yeah, that's kind of been the bigger challenge is how do we make them resistant to really difficult weather environments? But yeah, we've got around that so far.
Thanks so much. It's been really interesting hearing from both of you, especially the food ladder. My name is Cheyenne. I grew up in regional New South Wales, and I also noticed that when I was a kid, there's compared to a big city, you don't have as much exposure to all these diverse foods, different cuisines. How do you address that issue with, getting kids even interested in different types of healthy foods from different cuisines that rely on different ingredients than what they're used to? Is that something that you address in these programs? And if so, how? It's really interesting.
The teachers in the schools often bring their own lens. I remember very, very early on, I can't even remember the exact school now, there was one principal that we were like, try it out, I think the school will love it. And she said, look, this was up in the north where it's really humid. She said, if I can grow coriander, I'm in. All she wanted, since she'd moved from Sydney, was some nice Asian greens. And we were like, oh, yeah, it grows like a weed in food ladder. You're right. I think the teachers kind of bring they have their own kind of lens from their own kind of experience. But this is the beautiful thing about the kind of network that's created with all the schools is that they all end up sharing what they're doing. They're pickling things and kimchis and all sorts of bits and pieces. So they start sharing that on the WhatsApp group or with one another on the socials and so forth. And it just kind of starts to unlock that. We encourage a little bit of healthy competition between the schools. We love a winner, so who's grown the most whatever and who's come up with the most exciting, innovative recipe. Each year we run a competition, Food Ladder Ambassador Award and so forth. So that kind of gets everyone going.
Talk a little bit about the way you've built community in the schools and across the schools.
So we've, again, always taken the approach of we never just go into a community. We've always invited. And that's important because, for obvious reasons, these are place-based and that this kind of sense of ownership is extremely important. So what we've tried to do is minimise our physical involvement. So right from the laying of the concrete slab through to the construction of the greenhouse itself, often there'll be fundraisers that will happen by the school, by the community for the cost of the greenhouse. People are they're having sausage sizzles, they're having mufti days, they're running around the oval trying to raise money. So they own these things. They belong to the community. And then again, having every teacher kind of invested is really, really important in it. So making sure that everyone's kind of got a touch point. But that's worked really well, the sense of ownership.
I love what you said about the pride that growing food and how that kind of brings this to like kids wanting to go to school and everything like that. I loved hearing that. I just wondered, in the Indigenous communities, do you find that is there more pride when it comes to, I guess, regenerating their own bush foods or growing their own bush foods versus introduced foods, if you will? Or is it kind of similar in terms of the pride it brings?
Yeah, no, good question. I haven't it's just like in general. I think the experimentation is really exciting. There's a real kind of culture of wanting to try it out and see what works. It is a crazy thing, right, about food. And it's another one of these incredible insights that we didn't really appreciate when we set out on this kind of journey. But across every culture, we come together with family and loved ones around food. Food is at the heart of every important event that we have together as human beings. And I think that's just a fact of human existence. And we see that it's really lovely as an outcome to see people connecting around food, which is good for them in a really positive way. And yeah, that brings us all a lot of joy. Every time we have a food ladder that's been commissioned, there's always a first harvest lunch, and that's kind of the big celebration. So in the communities where there's a large Indigenous population, there's often a smoking ceremony, and it's powerful. It's a positive time.
Programs around the world that are kind of looking at that reintroduction of tastes and even the concept of tasting food for kids. Because of the food system being broken, they just don't even know certain flavors. But there's a lot around how do you actually build taste education. There's actually one being run out of the UK now that's started to grow a curriculum around taste education, which is it doesn't tie in the growing element, but it's just purely how to get kids to taste different foods. And they have a whole methodology that brings into school, and they can get kids eating anything straight away. And you can contextualize that to localized, seasonal, Indigenous, lost and forgotten or underutilized crops. And so there's a lot of work around that. And I think for climate, with a changing climate with high health and loads, this is absolutely critical work, because we have to diversify what we're feeding people, and we have to look at what grows where, even in a controlled environment, because there's access to seeds, there's different nutritional densities, there's all kinds of different things that we need to be thinking about. And so I think this kind of pairing together and this exposure to food, there's all different ways that we're reconnecting to those foods and to the culture that connects to those foods, the ceremonies, the history, the identity. And that can be done really well, but it does need support and it needs those bridges built. Thank you everyone for joining us. Check out Food Ladder, follow Food Ladder on Instagram and all the other channels. But otherwise, thank you so much. And thank you to South by Southwest and all its partners for having us. Thank you.
You've been listening to Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. Future Fork is produced by Disruptive Consulting Solutions and supports the SDG2 Advocacy Hub. For more info, head to the website futureforkpodcast.com. This show was produced with strategy and production support from Wavelength Creative. So you don't miss an episode of Future Fork, make sure to subscribe to or follow the show in your podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a 5-star review. It really helps others find the show. I'm Paul Newnham, and I'll see you in the next episode.